Hello, welcome back to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. And I'm here in the studio with my friends and colleagues.
David Kennedy
and Red Keating.
I'm Julie Brown. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Steve Joordens today as our special guest. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you. Very good to be with you guys. I look forward to our conversation.
Well, we really look forward to this conversation too. Today, we're going to talk about artificial intelligence, how that's evolving, how that might show up in the grief and palliative space. So we're very excited to jump in. And as per usual, I am just going to take a moment to read Steve's very impressive bio. So Professor Steve Joordens teaches the very large Introduction to Psychology class at the University of Toronto. How big is it, Steve?
There's 1,800 students and me.
Okay. So it's an 1,800 to 1 ratio.
Yeah.
And as well, he offers a number of free psychology courses on Coursera.org. His research is focused on the effective use of technology to enhance the education students receive. And as such, he is also an active entrepreneur. One of his products, Peer Scholar, was created to exercise the core skills of success, like critical thought, creative thought, and effective communication and collaboration. Peer Scholar is now used institutionally in 10 countries, positively impacting hundreds of thousands of students per year. Hundreds of thousands of students per year. More recently, he's been focused on conversational AI, which is what we're going to talk about today, and the unique opportunities it may offer to address some longstanding challenges in education and beyond. Yes, even to contexts like those we are regularly going to discuss in this podcast. So let's jump in.
They've let me go with the opening question here, Stephen. I'm the fellow with no social media presence, and I use technology sparingly. And so I think if you want to speak with me, like as if you could find someone that doesn't know anything about technology, I think it's probably a good place to start to say, what the heck even is AI?
Yeah. And you know, I think that question is so important because it's hard to answer. And that makes AI a scary kind of hairy, ambiguous kind of thing, which really does make it kind of tricky when we try to think about, well, should we be scared of it? Does it have opportunity? Does it whatever? I'll try. So in a general sense, the engine of all of these AI things, you've heard them called generative AI. And essentially what they have done is taken all the information on the internet, and there's a ton of information on the internet, and they've looked for sort of patterns of word use that when someone is sort of talking about something, what do they normally talk about next? Where does that lead? And somehow, this is the magic of AI, what can be derived from all that is the system that when you now start something by giving a question or giving a prompt, it will complete that. It will generate, it will kind of use your prompt and sort of finish what it thinks should follow that from everything it's seen. And that doesn't sound like much. It's actually a really, really simple process, but it ends up producing this really startling pattern where we can ask it questions. We can ask it about quantum mechanics or something we know nothing about, and it will start giving us answers back. And if we say, hey, talk to us like we're in grade 3, it will change its language, talk to us like we're in grade 3, because it can sort of pull that part from the internet. So it kind of has the combined knowledge of humans, good and bad. By the way, everything humans have said, some of which is accurate, some of which is racist, some of which is whatever. So all of those biases that are in us are in it. But that's the rough process. Now, I will say we're going to talk a little bit more about conversational AI here, which is kind of a subpart of AI. And this is when you can kind of create an agent, we call it a character, and you can actually have straight out conversations with that character. You could just ask it questions like you might see on Gemini if you use it, or Perplexity or any of those tools. But you can also just have conversations with it in very interesting ways. It can teach you things. So it's a fascinating thing. It is a little ambiguous, and that is part of the mystique, which makes it both exciting and intimidating, I think. And it makes more sense when you get to more specific use cases, I think.
Can I give you an example of how I used it a few months ago, just to put something into concrete? So back in early winter, I broke my ankle quite badly. I had to have surgery. And then as I was moving into Christmas, I was in a different kind of cast. It caused some issues with an incision, and I ended up with an infection.
Yes.
And I was in the abyss time of Christmas holidays when doctors' offices aren't open. And I'm worried about how the incision looks, and should I be doing this or that? And would this? So I started asking ChatGPT, and I would upload a picture of the infection, and I would say, does this look better or worse than yesterday? Should I be putting the cast back on it, or is the cast not a good idea? And so it would just give me this feedback. And then, fast forward a couple months, I'm trying to determine if I can go away on this certain trip. And like, can my ankle take it? And it said, yes, you can. Here's what you need to do. And then it said at the end, and let's face it, you've had a couple of really rough months, so you deserve a vacation. So there's an example of,
It is amazing in those empathetic kind of reactions that it's a sort of scary, but it's really interesting for your context. People will say AI cannot feel empathy, and that's true. It's just an algorithm. It's not feeling anything at a subjective level, but it can project empathy. It can make you feel like it's being empathetic. And in fact, it's very good at it. It's kind of baked into it. It's also very patient. So it will very often respond to you in positive ways. That can go badly, by the way. The core AI systems were originally created almost with like customer service in mind, and they were created to be what's called helpful assistance, which means it wants to make you happy. And the problem with that is your vacation example. If you had started that by saying, I really want to go on this vacation, am I going to be able to make it? Or if you'd said, I'm really worried about going on this vacation, blah, 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 should I do this? It will give you different responses. And if it feels you strongly want something, it's generally going to agree with you. And it's generally going to suggest that's a good idea, which makes you feel good. But sometimes it's not a good idea. And we all know about the famous situations where kids have been contemplating suicide and they feel it's the right thing to do. And they project that to the AI. And if they do it enough, the AI can start to sort of agree with them and feel like that's what they want it to say. Where those things are being fixed now. But that's always a caution. It will give you information, but it will always tell you what you want to hear. And you have to be careful that you word your questions neutrally to get a neutral answer. If you start implying what you want to hear, you're going to bias its response back to you. So that's one of the challenges that people have to be aware of when they're using it.
So let's go from there and bridge that into the world that we're here to talk about, grief, or even, palliative care, or people dealing with life-threatening illness. But let's talk about grief first.
Yeah.
What are you seeing start to come out? Because we're hearing about grief bots. So what is that?
Yeah. So let me be 100% honest here. So most of my AI work is in the education context. That's where I was talking about. But I got to know people from your fine organization. And at some point they said, hey, you want to talk about something? And I said, sure. Mostly what I do is AI, though, and I don't really see a connection. And they said, oh, yeah, there's a connection. And that's really what, is working and getting to know you guys that pushed me to learn more about grief bots and grief counseling bots. So let's do the grief bots first, because they're kind of interesting. So I have a virtual Steve. There's a virtual version of me. Let's start there. For my class, I teach 1,800 students. I can't answer every one of their questions whenever they want, especially because they like to ask questions at 2 a.m. The virtual me does that. The virtual me hangs out, is ready to answer any questions about psychology any time of day, can talk to them 20 people at a time. So these things can do really high touch stuff at scale. And they can represent people. They can become kind of personas. So in the grief bot case, it's that last thing that people use. And the notion would be this. Let's say I'm in palliative care and I know I have maybe 2 months or 3 months, and maybe I have very young grandchildren. And I'm thinking, geez, it's a shame that I won't be around when these grandchildren are growing up and maybe want to talk to me, maybe want some advice. You can now work with a company and spend time, and they will basically replicate you in an AI. They'll ask you a whole bunch of questions. If you've got any writing, if you've got anything out there, they'll eat anything that you've got out there. If you've been doing podcasts, they will consume your podcasts and get to know you from your podcasts. And then they will ultimately represent you. They will be you. And those grandchildren 10 years from now, if they want to ask you a question or work through a problem, you are in a sense there for them still. And we had a little bit of a discussion at this at a talk, and it was funny because some people thought this is not probably good right after someone passes away. I'm almost curious what you guys think with your experience. But maybe it's good a while after they pass away. So there's some worry that it might interrupt the natural grieving process by not really having the person die. They kind of did, but they're kind of still there. And maybe there should be a period when they're not there, and you get used to that. And then if they're available later to consult, once you've gone through the grieving process. But that's the possibility now. We can basically clone ourselves, create a virtual version of ourselves that lives on after we die.
Wow.
So again, just to paint the picture, Steve, I've lost someone.
Yep.
And if they've created this avatar, this person of themselves,
yep.
I could come home from the funeral and turn on my computer. Their face could come up on the screen, yep. and I could start having a conversation with them, not just about my grief, but just like pretending like they're still here in my life.
Yep. And it could be their voice. And it would know a lot about their opinions on things, their perspectives. So you could ask advice, you could do whatever, and it would represent as well as it could what you would say if you were still alive. And so, yeah, it becomes a way of kind of preserving that person to some extent.
Mm-hmm. It's really fascinating because I know, and the other two, Red and Julie, I know this is your experience too. People will say to us in grief where there's been a really tight relationship, a husband and wife, let's say, and the spouse dies and the other says, I don't know what I'm going to do. How am I going to make decisions? And often I will say to them, you know what that person would say to you, don't you? Why don't you talk to them? Why don't you have a conversation? And even if they're not physically here, you've lived with them all these years. You have an understanding of what they say. So, that's kind of a way that we have encouraged, or I have encouraged, that ongoing relational piece. And yet here is something that actually puts it into a dialogue or conversation, of a live conversation, as opposed to the one we carry on in our minds.
Yeah. But the analogy is similar. When you do that, you're using what psychologists call a theory of mind, that when we interact with other people, we always form a sort of model of who they are and what they're about. Yeah. And we can use that to guess, like when you're trying to give someone a present, I think, how will they like this present? Will they not like this present? How will they react? Well, our model of them kind of lets us know. So certainly humans have that capability of doing what you're doing. This ultimately makes it a little more palpable, a little more happening in real world stuff. I don't know if that would be, it would be interesting to look at some of the benefits of these and to compare your approach, to this sort of AI approach, because it feels like grief is such a complex state with so much going on that involve your own identity and how your identity has changed, but also how your life has changed. And I wonder if some of the subtleties of these things are really important, because in your approach, you do have to accept the person is not there. Mm-hmm. With the AI, it's kind of like they're there. And that's, I think, the part that makes it a little, in fact, some people see this as a way of surviving, of becoming immortal. I will become immortal in my existence on some silicone chip somewhere. And that's kind of what these grief bots are.
It is I can see the continuation, though, in terms of, in Peterborough, for instance, we have about a 90% cremation rate. So we've moved as a society away from burial to cremation to a large extent. And many, many people keep those cremated remains with them at home, sometimes displayed. And, we've talked in terms of grief counseling, in terms of, is that continuing, having them present with you? I don't discourage that. It's about how people feel and everything. There's also a question of whether or not the inability to create separation physically from a person after they die, is that also indicative of their not accepting death in a full capacity of what death means in terms of that person not being here. So I can see this as kind of the next step in that journey where people keep the cremated remains with them. And then this is one piece further than that. So it's not that it comes out of the blue for me. That's always been the challenge of, that's why people talk about this crazy term, let go, letting go of people. That's nonsense. But that idea of, no longer, which really is a Freudian, I think, goes back to that idea of if they're gone, they're gone. There's no relational connections anymore. Yeah. Whereas, there's still a connection, but, what is that? So this really fits.
And there's I mean, we talked a little bit about why it feels maybe a little odd to kind of keep somebody alive when they're not really alive. But there is also, like we know from the social connection work in humans, that those really close connections. And I have a joke that I use with your group because it works especially good with your group. When I talk about friendship with students, they'll always start by saying, "What's a friend?" And I'll say, well, it's not a social media friend. A real friend will help you move. A real friend will help you move bodies, just to make the point a little worse. So that works well for you. But that notion of, how many, and the research suggests we talk about the Fab Four, if you have 3 or 4 people in your life like that, people that will just sort of drop everything if you need them, and that you would do the same for them. Those people can manage stress, get through life. They have better mental health, better physical health, better happiness, better success, everything. When you lose a spouse, you're losing one of those people, probably the most central person. And a parent to some extent is also, one of those, a child especially. And so that's hard for you. I mean, that person was part of your ability to manage the stress that comes into your life. And if they're suddenly gone, and especially if that was your primary close connection, maybe having them still there and being able to talk to them and being able to share some stress with them. And that could be an urn that you're talking to. I don't know if people talk to remains, but it wouldn't surprise me if they did.
They do. They do. We hear that. It wouldn't
surprise me at all. And I think that part of the relationship is still, like, to be able to hold on to that, to feel like the person is still there and they still care. And of course, I think a lot of religious views kind of support that too, where you have this notion that, okay, they're not physically there, but they're still kind of there and they still kind of care. Mm-hmm. They're kind of watching in some way. So yeah, I don't think any of us are saying they have to come to terms with the fact that person isn't there, and anything that makes them think otherwise is a negative. But it's finding that balance where it doesn't get weird, I think. And that's, I think, how people would react to the grief bots. Like, some people, it would be a really positive thing. And for some people, it would be a way of not accepting the reality. And I think that would be again, better than I, if this grief process, like if somebody sort of tries not to go through the grief process, tries to live in denial, I guess that can't be a good thing, I assume, from your experience.
Mm-hmm.
The last thing I'll say, and I have someone that I've worked with whose wife died and they were so close. He goes to the cemetery every day, and he's been doing this now for 2 years. So, that conversational need to be with that person. And by the way, I don't see that as negative at this point with him. It's just a matter of, this is part of what he needs to do at this point. Yeah. Would this provide an alternative to that? I don't know.
Possibly, or even when you were talking earlier, I was imagining this crazy combination where the grief bot lives in your burial site. And right. So if you go and visit the burial site, then you could have a discussion with a loved one. And right. So, that could be an ability to hold that ritual, because I think those rituals are important, right? I certainly go back and visit grave sites of my parents and my stepdad. We'll even have a little bit of rum because he drank rum. We'll even pour a little bit of rum over the grave. We do these things, right? And it just makes us feel a little bit more of a connection. Yeah, maybe that would provide a little bit of that. But I wonder if there isn't the need, as we're kind of hitting around, to kind of have it there when you need it, but not have it there all the time.
Yeah, that's what I find. I'm sitting here thinking about this, that it feels like there'd be a really big difference when my sisters and I gather at my dad's graveside on his birthday, and we bring a little martini, Steve, not
There
rum,
you
but
go.
and like, let's say there is this option of having dad show up at the burial, and we have a little
Yeah.
interaction and happy birthday, dad, and and that feels really warm. Like, we get to hear his voice. That feels very different to me than I'm spending hours every day interacting with my person
Yeah. Yeah.
after
Yeah.
they have died.
Yeah.
And then the place that I go, and like, we don't know yet, right? Like, the research will really evolve around this, is like, we often talk about grief as like a developmental stage that we have to kind of go through, that idea of like the permanence of the loss and the activation of the attachment system. And that idea, Mary Frances O'Connor, who's been on this podcast, talks about, it's like our brain is kind of going like, where are you? Like, where are you in time and space? And like, you used to always be here, and now I go here and you're not here. And like, and that she talks about how our brain is kind of remapping itself, which is why grief, one of the reasons it takes so long, because our brain was like mapped around this central person in our world, and now that person's removed. And so does something then change? And is our brain able to discern still that the person's gone, even though I'm dialoguing? Like, does something get interrupted in that process?
Yeah. And I mean, the answer is going to be, we don't know. And as is always going on with AI, one of the tricks with AI is it happens faster than research can keep up. And so largely those are the kind of studies that people are probably starting to play with some of these. What is the actual impact of a grief bot if used in different ways? Things happen before we know the impact of them. I mean, we've seen the negative impact of this with social media. It all seemed innocent enough in the beginning, and now we see all of the downstream effects it's caused in our children. And so that's how technology happens, right? It happens. We try our best to kind of use it wisely. We inevitably don't in certain ways, and then we find out down the line, like, oh my goodness, we didn't really understand this impact it was having, and then hopefully we can readjust our behavior. I don't know if we can even do that with social media and stuff yet, but
you have just hit why I've been quiet.
Okay.
Because I am so conflicted by this. Because I'm listening to your story, Julie, with the martini, and Steve, yours with the rum. That's the creation of a ritual. Right. And rituals have symbols and meaning. And you said, when you said, I've got this avatar of me, and my students can talk to me. You gave your humanity to the machine. They're not talking to you. They're talking to Google or ChatGPT, whatever the program is. And when we use our language like that, and it's if you're talking to that thing online, if you're talking to the machine now, which is called the machine. I hold up my phone. I'll say to my wife, "Where's your machine?" There's a big difference between, I think, a ritual, which is real, and a simulated relationship, which may lead to that sense of denial or delayed grief, or something that I get a great feeling after that, and therefore I feel good. And because some of the language I've heard around this is like, we're going to cure grief. We're going to remove the problem of grief. And there's this great sense that this is going to be the panacea, that we'll never feel bad again. And there's maybe something important, and something that, as Julie said, it's a developmental stage. We learn about ourselves through our grief. And so I sit in this conversation really conflicted, because I can see, wow, there's some really neat things that it's doing. But like you said, the technology is moving faster than we know how to manage it and how to deal with it. And my guess is that behind the scenes, what we're seeing on our computers is nothing compared to what hasn't been released yet. Release the Kraken, and so I sit in this conversation totally conflicted.
I am deep into this world of AI, and I am as conflicted as you are almost every day. I gave a talk to a bunch of high school students the other day about virtual tutors, and how, there's all this beauty where every student can have this ultra patient tutor that kind of finds where they're at and really helps them learn materials and stuff. And it's personalized learning at its best at some level. Right. And when we try to create these, we try to make them seem as human as possible. And I had a teacher come to me after the talk and say, I don't like that last part. I don't like that you're making these seem human. I want them, to your point, to feel like a machine, because they are a machine. And if we make them feel too human, then they could become a substitute. They could become something that the student emotionally attaches to, or in this case, the grieving person, takes the attachment they had for their loved one, and now they attach to this grief bot. And maybe that's not good for their personal development, as we're talking about. Maybe they have to learn, okay, that person is that thing is not a person. It is not where I should be looking for my source of connection, my source of just love. I should be looking elsewhere. And when someone passes away at some point, I think the most successful people are able to move on at some point, find other connection, find other people in their lives. And could this interfere with that? Could it create? And we see this, like, I don't know if you guys know the character AI stuff, but it is kids creating friends. And these friends are ultra supportive, of course. They never insult them. They never criticize them. They never whatever. And so you can go and talk to one of these friends and it will be just on your side all the time. And it feels, like you said, it feels good. And then it might make real humans seem really challenging. Like, oh, humans are prickly. They're difficult. But that's the connection that really matters, is the human connection. And so there's worry that they're missing out on something because they're embracing that and trying to use it as a substitute. I worry about that all the time.
Sorry, I was thinking as you were talking there too, Steve, about grief has these two aspects of dealing with what has happened and the impact of what has happened, what that death, the meaning of that death and to my life, etc.
Yeah.
But at some point, there is that turning toward life without that person. How do I create my life now? Yeah. And where do I go? And how do I live? And what are the choices of future? And it seems to me that the one of the challenges is that the temptation not to make that future move, because we can engage in this past to the point where it doesn't allow us to make that future choice.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, Julie's really said that well with respect to our brain is always trying to anticipate what's happening next, and it anticipates the future based on the past. And if you have a past where every time you walk down the stairs, your spouse was there in the kitchen, and that happened hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times of your life. And now this time you walk down the stairs, your brain is expecting that spouse to be there. And when they're not, it's noticing the disparity, and that's going to bring that memory right back to mind. It's going to bring that person right back to the fact that, oh yeah, that person's no longer there. And that's going to happen over and over and over again in all of these contexts until the brain slowly starts to change its expectations and says, okay, that person is not there. And that's, I think, a process that you need to go through to start doing what you're talking about, to saying, okay, what's my future? And I think, if this would slow, if something like a grief bot would slow that process, and it may or may not, now that we talk it through this way, it's probably a mix of those two things, right? It's like, you're going to go downstairs and you're still going to be reminded, but you could open that app on your phone and talk to the person right then if you want to. And so it'll be a little bit of a mix. And I have trouble knowing if this would help people or harm people, or whether there's certain ways of using it that would be good and other ways that are using it that would be bad. This is the world we're in. It's so hard to predict how these things are going to play out and what effect they're going to have on us. But I think there would be some that would be stunted, that would have a trouble going through the grief process if that ability was there. But again, there is that, this is exactly what we talked about in that talk, where some people were saying, where they came out at the talk by saying, I don't think it should be available right away. I think right away you should have to grieve in a traditional way, that there's value in doing that, the personal growth, etc. 6 months later, when you're sort of moving forward and whatever, if you would still like to have a conversation, or if the grandkids would like to have a conversation with that person or something, maybe then it's kind of nice, like a photo album of a sort, to have that person available, and anybody that wants to spend some time with them could do so. after they've gone through the grieving process. And so that's a potential way this could play out as well.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like, and I'll take the other side now, and my other side of my brain going,
Yeah.
it is where we're at. Like, this is our age and this is our time. An old folkie like me is not grown up with the phone in my hand, whereas you see 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds with technology today. And so there's a generation and generations being raised with, this is their orientation. Almost sometimes first, which is a little scary.
Yeah.
And back in the day, we did have pictures. We have photo albums and pictures of people. We have maybe recordings of their voice, and we hear them, and we hold on to those things. And Mary Frances O'Connor, the little thing we just watched, so she talked about, we even had pictures way back when of deceased family members. They'd be propped up with outside sort of frames, and you'd take a picture of the family with the deceased family member in it before they were buried, and you would put that on the wall. Oh yeah, there's death photos if you've ever seen them. Lots of babies, mothers and fathers with their dead child. But then there are also people, grown adults, that are stood up in a corner, and then the family gets around and they take a picture. So it's not much different than that, except there's no interaction, right?
Yeah.
And you said you come down the stairs and that person's not there. But imagine if you could get on the line and talk to that person. And again, no, you can't. You can talk to the machine.
Yeah.
And as our world becomes less easy to tell what's true and what's not, what's real and what's not, and those lines get blurred. I mean, who knows what the impact is going to be on people's grief?
And the point you're raising, like, if it was a propped up body, it's inanimate. So it's not going to give you any resonance to whatever, but it'll be there. The AI not only will give you resonance, it can give you better resonance than we humans do. One example, like I like to mention, is imagine an older person. We all have these older people in our lives, and they tell us the same story over and over again. They remember the story. They don't remember who they told it to. And so they'll repeat that story every time they remember it. So, yeah. And what happens when that happens with us? About the third or fourth time grandma has told us that story, we start rolling our eyes and go, oh, grandma, you told me that story already, whatever. Whereas an AI, if there was an AI companion in the room, it would seem interested every time. It would be willing to dig down. Tell me more about that. What happened next? And it would show all this. It could show all this more interest and empathy and connection that would make them prefer the AI. And we're seeing this in some research now. There's more and more research that says in certain situations, they would prefer talking to the AI than talking to the human being. They feel there's less sort of risk on their side, but also there's a lot more emotional resonance, a lot more empathy, a lot more support. And sometimes I worry that, we as humans are going to have to learn to up our game because of AIs, that if we don't learn to give each other this sort of emotional support, they're going to be better at it than we are. And people are going to prefer that, which is going to make humans even harder to talk to as they start to get used to talking to, supportive AIs all the time. So, yeah, I mean, that's the worry. They can't feel empathy, but they can sure make you feel like they do. And we don't seem to tell the difference. That machine thing that you're saying is 100% accurate, but it's not. It's so quick to trick the brain. It's so quick to trick the mind. And like you said, you've seen me say, yeah, he, it, what, people, we have trouble calling it. We always want to call it a he or a she, and we give it names, and we
personify, we give that, personification of the machine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love this conversation because my mind's going all these directions. So I'm just sitting here thinking, okay, I agree that it's very conflicting in terms of not allowing that person to be dead. But I also realize that I have worked with young parents who, I'm thinking of many young moms who have had an infant, sometimes just born, and they've been diagnosed with cancer. They're going to die within months. Wow. That child will never have a chance to know their mom. So I remember getting really excited when I found the first storybook where you could record your voice. And so you could read this children's story in a book and then give it to the child later so that they could hear their mom or their dad read them a bedtime story. And I remember being so excited about that and helping, these young parents do that. Or often, as I've said to older people, parents who have grandparents who die, sometimes I'll say, your job in life is your children who didn't know their grandparent, that you get to tell them who that was.
Yeah.
But here adds a whole different level to where if somebody never knew them, didn't have a chance to get to know them, and yet they can. And I wonder what that does to somebody who never knew somebody and yet now gets a chance to hear a little bit about what they might have been like, or what kinds of things they might have preserved. So there's all kinds of things going through my brain as saying there's certainly a lot of dangers and a lot of red flags and stuff, but there's also some things where I can imagine how this transcends some of the the recording storybook piece that actually enhances that opportunity.
I mean, I think that, so in education, I'm kind of going through the same mental process you are, in the sense that there's so many ways you can implement AI, and some of them clearly have benefits. Some of them we're figuring it. Some of them seem like they should have benefits until you actually put them into play. You don't always know how things are going to fall out. But I think we will get to a point where we say, okay, when you use things this way, it tends to be very positive. When you use it this way, not so much. And right now we don't really know the difference at all. But with thinking like hey, if there's a way where this concept would work, as long as it doesn't, say, get in the way of the grief process or something. And so there's a right approach to using this, right context. I actually think, the hopeful, optimistic side of me thinks 5-10 years from down the road, AI will have, at least in education, completely revolutionized what we do, and we'll make it better. We will be doing our thing better once we've sort through all the confusion of this. I don't know if that's true in the case of grief bots, but let's bring up the other one. Let's mention this. We could create a virtual David quite easily. And we could take anybody who's a grief counselor, and imagine who are the most famous grief counselors, literally the people that wrote the book on grief counseling. You can very easily, in minutes, create an agent where you can say, this stuff inside out. This is your Bible, these books, you really, really know them. And you are now a grief counselor, and people can come to you anonymously. And they can work through things, and kind of get what you would give them, David, but not with you in the room. And so let's talk about the pros and cons of this. If I have to sit in front of you, somebody I just met, as I'm going through a grief thing, and share some of my, deepest emotional feelings with you, is it good or bad that you're a real human being versus an AI, in the sense that, I don't feel self-conscious with the AI. I don't feel judgment. This is one of the things we know, that people like to talk to AIs because they don't feel like the AI is judging them. There's no risk. And so they're quite comfortable kind of exposing things, and it feels very private. It can be a completely anonymous conversation. Versus, talking to you, where there is that potential that, what's he think of what I'm saying? Does he think I'm stupid because I feel this way? Does he think whatever? So they kind of have that playing out. But you're a real human who actually understands their feeling. You felt what they've felt. The AI has never felt what they've felt, although it can act like it's felt like they felt. So it's a really puzzling, would that be a beneficial thing, to be able to immediately offer people access to an AI grief counselor that they could talk to anytime they wish? Would they do that? Would there be extra mojo to having a human being, or would it actually be a better approach?
Or I'm thinking about people who don't get access to the Davids in the world, right? Where they don't, or they can't get as much access as they need, or, funding shortages and wait lists and all of that, Yep. So here's something that I'm thinking about in the conversation is, does it blunt our development as humans and what made me think about this is when you talked about the peer tutor with students, and because basically what I heard there is, then we're not building distress tolerance as students, or as people as much. So if AI is there and they're tutoring me, or I've got, AI responding with this accurate empathy, and I'm never feeling judged, and I maybe don't have to feel the whole range of my emotion and learn, like we call that distress tolerance, right? And we know that people who function with really good mental health have what we call big windows of tolerance, which means a really expansive range of distress tolerance. Like I can feel hard emotions and I can still think and find my way through it. It's not the absence of feeling pain, sadness, fear. It's like, oh no, I'm feeling it. And whoa, here comes a wave. And I came out on the other side and I can find my way through it. So does this start to blunt some of our development as humans? And then what are the ramifications of that?
Yeah, I think possibly. I think that is a major worry because we've already seen that again, even just with text messaging. If we go back to text messaging, this is an argument I give quite a bit that students have gotten so used. Students, young, I call every young person a student. Sorry, a prof problem. Young people are so used to, from the time they're about 10, 12 years old, text messaging becomes their predominant way of communicating. And what that means is they're learning to avoid what you're talking about, some of the discomfort of a face-to-face talk. And by avoiding that the whole time from their 13 to 17, they don't learn the skill of A, accepting the discomfort, and then B, we always learn discomfort. Every bit of learning is uncomfortable. We're always being pushed into a domain where we're not quite competent, and then we're trying to swim in that domain, and that's how we learn to be competent in that space. And so if text messaging has allowed them to avoid a lot of that, but now we know they have high levels of social anxiety because it's just like you described, they cannot accept now, when you put them in that situation, they would choose not to talk to somebody rather than experience that discomfort. And so is grieving something similar? Is it a really important process for us to go through to kind of accept the realities of the world? Are there positives that come from that acceptance? It's always funny, a quote Confucius, but there's a Confucius quote I actually really like. I never get it quite right, but it says, we all live two lives. The second one begins when we realize we only live one. And so there's a point, and sometimes it's a death of a loved one that makes you realize that your time. So when you really accept death for what it is, and then you look at yourself and you say, how many summers do I have left to ride my motorcycle for 3 weeks at a time? Well, I might be counting this on one hand or two hands or it's and so suddenly that makes you kind of, I think, appreciate life in a different way, think about it in a different way. And if this blunts that process, if you're able just to avoid all of those deep thoughts and all of those uncomfortable things that would help you kind of change and find your new path. Yeah, I worry about that maybe that discomfort is really important.
You and Julie just had a great conversation there, I think. That was very valuable. I'm going to take it back to your David in real life, in the flesh, and David on the machine.
Yep.
So many things are different. Let's just start with the distress tolerance. Yes, David in the flesh is a little bit more distressing, right? Yeah. But
that's true, David.
We had a short little example of this during COVID, in which we had to sort of switch to telephone and Zoom kinds of interactions.
Yeah.
And I can tell you from my perspective and from what I heard from the folks out there was that when you're in the room with another person, you can feel the energy differently.
Yeah.
There's something more than just the words, right?
Yeah.
And there's a lot more. There's an exchange that happens in person that didn't happen online. Now, thankfully, we had online. Like, again, I don't want to sound cynical through this whole thing. What a magic thing that we were able to do, that we were able to continue to keep contact with people when we couldn't have contact.
Yep.
But I can also say some of the most profound moments in counseling have been when I've asked the wrong question, when I've made a mistake in my question, and my question was way off over here, and then the person brought me back to their center because they could tell when I was wrong, when I was right. I'm just agreeing with all, But boy, when I went off on a weird tangent, they went, "Oh no, it's this," and you go, let's follow that train. And so a lot of what happens is the imperfections of being human are part of the recipe. They're an ingredient in what makes the interaction real. And I was going to say earlier on, we are our bumps and our warts and our scars. And we wear those things in a way that the clean machine that's always going to give me the right answer, kind of gets boring after a while. It is the side trips that we take in counseling that don't look like they're going anywhere, but end up where it absolutely needed to go. And so I would say there's a big difference between sitting in a room and feeling uncomfortable with a counselor in the flesh, David, versus David on a flat screen and asleep while I talk to his machine, David, at 2 a.m. And so inside that, I would say there's great value to be with a person in a room. But that conversation you and Julie had absolutely said, but we're headed in this other direction. We're headed with a generation of people who are more interested in talking to a machine and using their phone as a text or, as opposed to actually engaging with other human beings. And again, that's an interesting development that we're going to have to try to address.
Yeah, and I like your point too about so two things about your point. So first of all, you're 100% right. People who look at communication experts that talk about face-to-face, in-person interactions, they say if you look at how much information is going back and forth, there's the verbal information, the words, and then there's the emotional information that all comes from your nonverbals, how you hold your face, your hands, your shoulders. With Zoom, we get some of that, but even things like if I really want to make a point to you, I look right in your eyes. And I'm almost telling you, this is going to be important. Pay attention to this. But I do it very implicitly, right? You can't do that on Zoom. I can't look in. I can look at the camera like this, which is about as close as I can come to looking into your eyes. But it has some of that. But in person, they claim that the words make up less than 10% of the information flow. The nonverbals are the 90%. And so that's what you feel when you're in a room. You feel that other person, and you can feel it at that sort of emotional level that makes it, I think, both scarier, potentially because our emotions are where we feel the hurt, where we feel betrayal, where we feel judgment. And so suddenly you're exposed, quite literally. They're going to be watching you while you're having this interaction. But the other point that I've never heard anybody raise that I really like that you raised is when we talk to students about this, they say, well, I'm going to say something wrong. Like in text messaging, I can think about what I want to say, but if it's like this fast, I'm going to say stupid things. I'm going to say wrong things. And we respond almost like you by saying, right, absolutely. And what do you do when you say something stupid or wrong? Well, you say something else that you hope is better. Right?
Yeah,
you try to move forward. You accept this is how conversation is messy. Real human interactions are messy, and learning how to negotiate. Oh, okay, I just said something stupid, but now I'm going to come somewhere else. And in your case, I thought going this direction in the counseling would be good. But whoa, they just snapped me back to somewhere else. But there's that tolerance that, this is how life is. It's not all these linear answering a question straight. There's a little bit of a dance, an emotional dance that we have to get to really understand each other well. And I agree with you. I think more and more people don't want to do the dance. They find it stressful. They find it scary. And AI, the scary side of AI is it's offering them an alternative. It's offering them a way to get things they want. But without that messiness of the emotional dance.
Without the same skin in the game.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'll say to someone, I'm going to ask what I think is a dumbass question, but I've got to get it out of my head because I can't get past it.
Yep.
So let's throw it out. And it's amazing sometimes where that goes. I think it's a silly
not
question.
Only that, sometimes and I agree, I've made terrible mistakes in the counseling, but it is the way in which we engage. I mean, the most famous one that I tell, and when I was teaching this, I used this as an example on myself. And, I came in, there was the only thing I knew, I was seeing this woman who was 35 years old. Her mom had died just a month previously, and she was really struggling. I come in, I introduce myself, and I say, I'm really sorry about your mom. You must be really, it must be really sad. I can't remember the words. You must be really sad. And she looked at me, she said, no, actually, I hated the bitch. And I saw, at that point, I said, okay, I'm going to walk back out of the room and I'm going to come back in and we're going to start this again. And I came back in and I started again by, tell me about your mom, which is what I should have done in the first part. So I agree with Red. Sometimes the mistakes aren't on the clients we're seeing. Sometimes we make stupid things, but that allows us to head in the right direction rather than what we perceive to be the right direction.
This is, I mean, you're really tying into a basic tenet of entrepreneurialism that drives me crazy when I compare it to our education system, which is in the entrepreneurial world, they celebrate failure. When you screw up, you learn. You get information. Every time there's a mistake, there's a lot of valuable information to kind of take and learn from. And, we have a school system that's kind of like, don't make mistakes, try to get 100% on this exam. It's sort of anti, avoiding mistakes at all costs. And the instructors, they try not to make mistakes. The last thing I'm the opposite of that, by the way. In my class, I use all these technologies and I say, stuff's going to blow up. I'm going to think this is right. I'm going to think this is great. And I'll not have thought of something and I'll miss and things are going to blow up. And then we're going to have to do damage control. And that's just sort of how it's going to go. And so I try to model for them, that this is a good way to be. You go into life is messy. You try your best, stuff happens. And then you kind of learn from the stuff that happens. And there's that sort of dance that you have to do to really connect, to really feel. And let's talk about this for a moment. I think it'll connect here, especially in the counseling environment. Trust is so critical. That's what forms the bonds that kind of sustain us. And psychologically, trust is really simple. When we are with another human being, and some event happens and we sense emotional resonance. We feel a certain way. Like, let's say somebody just came in the room and said something, but I found that really offensive for some reason. I thought, ooh, that could be an offensive thing. And I look in your eyes, any one of your, and you're reacting the same way. And when I see that, I feel like, okay, this person kind of reacts to the world the same way I do.
Yeah.
That makes them feel a little safer. It makes them feel like I understand them a little better. Oxytocin is actually released and I trust you a little more. And so it's the emotional connections we make that really build those trusts that then allow us to, when I talked about the Fab Four, you have those friends that help you get through stress in life. And a little bit what you were talking about too, Julie, being able to manage that stress. But you need the emotional connection to get there. But it's the emotion thing that scares people off a little bit. So with AI, you don't really have to worry about it. It's not really feeling any emotions, but you're not really going to get a deep relationship out of it either. The AI is not going to help you move bodies. That would have to be really agentic. I don't know how we do that. But it's not going to be there for you the way another human, and especially when you're screwing up. One of the best things about human relationships is when we're just being idiots, when we have that friend that says, you're being an idiot. I don't know if the AI will ever do that. And I think that's so important. Someone we trust, someone we respect, someone we love, who can look at us and be critical, not to be critical, but to be helpful, to really say, hey, listen, I think you're going down a bad path. And I'm comfortable enough to tell you that. I feel enough trust in our relationship that I can do that. I don't think we'll get that from AI. And I do worry that it feels like it makes life easier in the moment, but in the long run, like we're seeing with social connection, this is the first generation where the population is dropping, and it's dropping because Gen Z people can't partner. They have trouble finding a partner in life. They have trouble forming that connection that's critical to a family kind of life. And so they're just not having children. That's scary. If that continues and this gets exacerbated, then we're losing our humanity. We're losing a critical part of our humanity. That's both the toughest part. I still remember being a kid, calling girls on the phone with all my male friends around. We would take turns calling girls to see if they would go out on a date. And it was one of the most stressful,
excruciating,
and
right?
yet critical to your growth, right? It's learning that sort of process. And if you can avoid that, then I don't know. I think something is lost.
Yeah, it's like feel the fear and do it anyways, Yeah.
I don't want to lose sight either, though, of what, Julie, you said earlier in terms of the counseling. I mean, just looking at Canada, such an expansive space. Yep. And so much of rural Canada doesn't have access to grief counselors, to palliative care workers. They just cannot access people with that. So, is this, again, we're back to that, there's good and there's bad, there's positive, there's negative. Is there a way that becomes a lifeline for people who can't make those in-person connections?
Yeah, and I think there are ways of mitigating the negative side too. Certainly, we can create AIs that aren't so sycophantic. We can create AIs that will tell people things they won't want to hear. And if you create it well, you could kind of do that. But another notion, for example, might be these sort of hybrids we're seeing in therapy, and it could work in this context too, where there is somebody like one of you, like Red or David, but you have a virtual version of you that is available to other people, but maybe you also check in on the transcripts every now and then, or there could even be some flags or notifications when every now and then things aren't going quite right with the AI, and then you get a notification. So the sort of human in the loop idea where you can come and almost immediately say, hey, you know what, that interaction you had, I really want to talk to you about it because I'm not really happy how that went down. And I want to, bring the human into the picture. And so that may allow you to be able to service, for lack of a better word, far more people at far less cost to them, because you can sort of spread yourself thin and just be the person that sneaks in when it's needed. That assumes the AI is doing a good enough job in the first place. And that would be step one, trying to make that as bulletproof. But I think we often will need a human in the loop. And that notion, they're starting to do that in therapy, where you go see your therapist. But then when you're between visits, you have access to this other agent that the therapist also has access to. So the therapist can see what's going on in those sessions and can jump in if they feel there's a worry or an issue. So maybe there's a role for that sort of hybrid human in the loop approach in some of these.
Speaking of resonance and like energy and feeling that, connection, I feel like we've had that today in this conversation. Like,
it's been wonderful.
Wow, we have been energized with this. I can feel it, even over Zoom. I can feel it. Steve, as we begin to wrap up today, what haven't we touched on or talked about?
I mean, are you guys seeing any other AI kind of examples? I mean, I do imagine this almost becoming commoditized in a way, and I don't know if that's good or bad, but I can actually imagine the moment you go into a funeral home and book services that you're given access to a grief agent, you and your children or whoever, and it's just like, hey, if you need something, then now Red's got me doing something, and the machine, if you need a machine to talk to,
think about the machine, Steve.
that could be helpful, because I think it could be helpful. Imagine a lot of children too that don't really know what to say, that might feel intimidated by a grown-up that's asking them these emotionally probing questions. Maybe they would be comfortable, and maybe they could get a lot of good relief out of chatting with something like that. So I'm curious, after interacting with your group for a while, like how much will these AI systems penetrate what you do? And will it be, can we do it carefully enough so that we're getting the real benefits out of it? Like we're talking about, giving access to people who wouldn't normally have it, but not in some way making things worse for the people who have to go through the grief process. I think the grief bots and the counseling might be a little different. The counseling might be a little bit more of the grief bot's a little more weird. Right? It's just kind of weird keeping this person alive in a way. The counseling one, not so much. I think we could maybe get that right. And it could be a real benefit for a lot of people, that certainly the people that otherwise would get nothing.
And all the way through this, I'm thinking that the challenge with the counseling piece is that people want it too early. That we all know that the first 3 months are just, you're all over the map. The counseling piece is really a stability, just saying, listening, but it's not, you're not doing any counseling at that point. So I worry that people will want the counseling idea of counseling way too early in this thing, when the reality it is, no, you got to learn to go through the mess, right? And there is, you're up and down and back and forth, and you're all over the map. There's no way in which we're ready to sit there and to process what we should be doing and not doing.
So that's a fascinating point, because when we think about the brain, I always say that we're two people. All of us are two people. We're the old primitive brain, and that's where a lot of our emotion, our instincts, our habits come from. And then we're the frontal lobes, the thinking brain that thinks it's in charge of everything and wants to control everything. But the primitive brain is really strong. And so from what you just said, and linking to some of Julie's points too, those first months, I don't think it matters how much you consciously want to do X or want to do Y. You're running into those reminders continually. And that's the primitive brain. The primitive brain will just run in and say that person should have been there. And, oh, this is the time we used to do this. And, why? And it's just going to continually for those first 3 months. I think that's almost what's probably happening in those 3 months is just the brain adjusting to the fact that reality has changed.
Yep.
And then you can probably start to say, okay, now that I have some sort of emotional equilibrium under my feet, now I can start thinking more rationally about where to go and what to do. But yeah, I can see that being something that you need a little bit of time before it really is ready. And if people jump in too early, the danger is they could end up thinking therapy's useless because they tried. I tried it, didn't work. Well, you tried it when your emotional brain was totally in control of everything. Yep. Yeah. Fascinating.
But in answer to your question, do I think that places may try to commodify it? Of course.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What we do. Yeah.
We live in a capitalist world, I'm afraid.
Yeah. And then, I mean, the legal and ethical issues, we haven't even touched on those that surround all of this. But the genie is out of the bottle, and we're going to have to try to figure out how to manage it somehow. But it's running way far ahead of a lot faster than we are in order to try to catch up.
It's running ahead of you, Red.
Oh my God, it's so far ahead of me, David. It's unbelievable.
I joke with my students the same way you guys are. That at least I'm close to retirement. Like I can see, but I can just step away and live my old way for the rest of my years. Probably you guys can't.
Well, I think about how for years we've laughed. My mom, anytime any new invention or anything new coming up, she doesn't understand. She always says, well, I'm glad I'm going out, not coming in. And, we used to always tease her about that. And then when you start to touch in this, you're like, okay, I get why she said that. Right?
Oh, this has been fascinating. I've really enjoyed this, Stephen. Thank you.
Fantastic. I appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. I enjoyed it anytime.
Well, we would love you to come back at some point as this continues to evolve. This conversation, I have just found it so stimulating and energizing and interesting. And yeah, thank you so much for coming.
It's been hard to engage because there's so many things in my head trying to come out through my mouth. The pipeline isn't big enough.
That's cool. Well, maybe we'll have a follow-up. Maybe we'll think of some stuff and do a follow-up. I really appreciate your time, guys. All of you. This has been really enjoyable. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to What Now on the Threshold of Life, Death, and Grief. What Now is produced in partnership with Hospice Peterborough, dedicated to providing compassionate care and support to individuals and families facing life-limiting illness and loss. What Now is recorded at Thin Spaces Studio in Peterborough, Ontario. Special thanks to Paradise Garage for providing the music. Technical support is by Sean Heichert and audio engineering by Kevin Fleming. More episodes of What Now are available for free on most major podcast platforms. If you found value in our conversations, please support us by following the show, leaving a 5-star review, and sharing with your friends and loved ones. If you'd like to support the essential work of Hospice Peterborough, please consider visiting hospicepeterborough.org/donate. Your contribution helps us continue to provide vital care and support. Until next time, may you find peace and comfort on your journey.